And we are live. Hi.
Hi.
So please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is John Strand. I'm in charge of Strand Consult. We are a company which is 25 years old, which are providing telecom operators worldwide with strategic information about how the market's evolving and how which impact regulation have on the industry. So our clients is more than 170 operators worldwide, which actually get access to our knowledge about the industry.
Actually, I think around 11 years ago, I was at Mobile World Congress. It was the first time Google was doing a keynote. It was Eric Schmidt. And at the Q&A at the end, I remember you asked a question. Was it something to do with Google trying to take over the whole with voice over IP? Some question like that.
Yeah,
But
I think it was the questions regarding what Google was basically saying, what are you doing to invest in this industry? So I basically said that Eric Schmidt was a man with short arms and deep pockets. He wants to have free access to the industry so that he could deliver a lot of services where he sold advertising on top of it. And it's fun, people are still talking about it 11 years later. And I got so many comments after. Of course, it was a friendly environment among operators, but afterwards it showed up that actually Google is actually benefiting of the huge investments which the industry is making in infrastructure, and they basically don't pay for using the infrastructure, which they sell services on top of. Yeah.
so I was so nervous in that moment because I was thinking I wanted really to get to the microphone. I wanted to ask Google why they are not open with Android. Like the tablets were there, but there was no official support, and they were blocking the Play Store. And it was like I thought it was anti-competitive. And in the last 10 years, they've made tens of trillions of dollars of revenue, and it's been making ridiculous amount of money just selling this gadget, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit controversial that these American tech giants just come in there, snoop the whole business.
Yeah, you can say the fun part is that these tech companies, you know, they try to pretend that they are so nice and they do things so nice and they want to make everyone happy, but in the end of the day, they're just focusing on making money. They're super capitalistic, and fair enough, but don't pretend you are something which you're not. If you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Yeah.
And I think it's unfair. As Europeans, we invented the Linux, we invented the web, we invented everything. But these American guys are making all the money, kind of.
Yeah, and actually, in our discussion today, I would like to come back to some of those things regarding how's the reality. The reality is that yes, they are very good at doing these things. Right now is China, Asia, and US, which is basically running with all the cookies, and Europe is just sitting back. And I think that we have made a lot of mistakes in Europe. I'm Danish. I love Europe. I'm pro the European Union, but I'm also critical to the European Union. That you can be critical at the same time as you can say you like it. That's a way to improve things. But I think that it's important to say that Europe right now are not in the best position if we look at what's going on and how the world is evolving.
You write a newsletter that goes out to like 40,000 people. Like a lot of tech insiders get this newsletter, and all the customers and stuff like that. And one of the last ones you were talking about this. I wouldn't want to use the word because Google might. They don't like videos that talk about this strange thing that's happening. But because of in the past year and the strange situation, people staying at home and people using so much of bandwidth, you are writing that the digital adoption has accelerated to a point it's like 15 years of EU regulations.
Yes, you can say that if EU makes some very interesting reports, the digital scorecard, where you basically can see how's digitalization in Europe. And the reality is that more than 50% that all small, medium enterprises in Europe are basically not digital. And what's interesting is that we talk a lot about technology. We want to go from 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G to 6G. It's one big orgy about technology, and every time there's introduced a new G, it gets a lot of attention. The reality is that if we look at what's happening in digitalization across Europe for the last 15 years, we must say that politicians is talking very much about we have to be digital, but the reality is we see a lot of small medium enterprises which have not been good at becoming digital. We see a lot of consumers which are not digital. In a little country like Denmark, where there's 5.7 million people, and which is a very digital society and where people have a good buying power, there's about 400,000 Danes which runs around with a phone which only support 2G and 3G. That means that these phones have a chipset which have the same functionality as the phone was put on the market 17 years ago. We see a lot of small medium enterprises which don't move in this direction, and we're just talking about we want to have higher bandwidth, we want to have fiber to the home, we want to have 5G and all those things. But I think the key problem is consumer adoption, corporate adoption, governments who don't become digital. And let me put it into perspective, is that the reality today is that the network technology is moving very fast. On top of that, you have operators adoption, implementing it, which moves significantly slower. The US and Korea is about 2 years ahead of Europe in 5G. And then in the end, you also have the consumers, which basically do late adoption for these things. So what are the service we're going to do with these things? And to be honest, a lot of consumers have not seen the advantages of digitalization the same way as you and I and a lot of our friends have seen. But the interesting thing is here, because of COVID-19, because of what's going on right now, we see a lot of companies, we see a lot of consumers who see actually the advantage of doing business on the internet, buying things on the internet, using these video apps like Zoom, like Microsoft Meets, Skype, whatever it is. So we use these solutions to get in contact with other things. I have small kids and they use it for their education. They go to school
On Zoom.
online. So I think it's interesting to see that the global pandemic, which we've been through the last almost a year, actually have had a huge impact on the digitalization in Europe. And I will actually claim that they have a bigger impact on digitalization in Europe than the last 15 years of regulation.
I cannot imagine how much bandwidth has been going on, because these ISPs, the guys that handle the backbones and the bandwidth, they must been working overtime like crazy over the last 12 months, right? There's so much Netflix, YouTube, I don't know if it's doubled in a year, but it's like so much more bandwidth people are using.
Yes, but the interesting thing is we haven't seen any cases of operators which have not been able to deliver to their customers what they have demanded. People have been able to get what they need. We don't see stories about networks breaking down or people getting slowed down. It's quite interesting to say that we actually have, and that's not only for Europe, that's counts for the whole world, that the telecommunication industry have actually built a very robust infrastructure, and it have been able to handle the explosion we have seen in traffic. And
I did
it's
see
quite interesting. We don't see the industry getting the credits they actually deserve for being the one who have been able to deliver here when this happened. Imagine this was happened like 15 or 18 or 20 years ago. How would the society have reacted? Now a lot of people can keep on working thanks to the modern technology. You could say, if we should be hit by something like this, timing have been correct. Because we had the infrastructure in place to serve a lot of people and giving them the service they need.
I did see some funny story in Greece, I think. I think it was especially in the islands in Greece, where they were telling people you're not allowed to go on strange websites and Netflix and all that stuff in working hours, because people need to do their working from home. They were talking about maybe, but it also shows that actually the networks out there have kind of like infinite capacity, right? So maybe the telcos have been talking about trying to limit and giving limits, but somehow they can just push a button and there's just so much bandwidth.
They have been able to do it, and I think it's, for me, it's been actually an eye opener. To be honest, when all these things happened and we saw the explosion in traffic, I said there must be some congestions. We must see some places where it will create problems, but have not. We also seen a lot of operators which have been taking a big responsibility by saying people get more data in their packages. data packages so they get more traffic for the same amount as they paid. They pay anyhow. And we also seen operators across the world offering special services, special prices for certain segments, poor people, and so on. In England, the British operators have done a very nice report describing these things, what they actually have done for the citizens, and the same in the US. In a lot of countries, the operators have not been going around bragging about what they've been doing for the consumers, but they've done a lot. I think actually, if there's someone which have done something, we could say, we talk about the people working in hospitals and so on, helping the sick people. Yes, of course, they deserve credit. The vaccine companies have been able to produce a vaccine in record time, less than a year. They deserve credits. But I also think the telecommunication industry definitely deserves some credits because of the what we see right now.
I forgot what the word is, but there's these workers that are what you call priority workers during this strange time, right? And telecom employees are defined as if people have to stay at home and they can't watch Netflix, that would be chaos. So
that's one thing. But just the fact that we can do things like we do together. In the past, we maybe have met at an event, a conference, Mobile World Congress. We've done an interview. Yeah. Now we can sit and do it in this way, and we get it in a very nice quality, and things is working. And this morning I had a business meeting with a client from the Middle East. In this afternoon, I have two business meetings with clients in the US and Latin America, and all those things can be done thanks to the global telecommunication infrastructure which is in place.
It's like it's so much into our lives. We assume it's like normal, but I've been kind of on broadband when I was in Denmark over the last 20 years. I feel like lucky because I was in Copenhagen and there was fast internet, but there's still millions of people, even in Europe, who have a little bit of a trouble to get good broadband, right? But then there's stuff happening like this Starlink satellite maybe is going to help, the Elon Musk project.
There is, and then there's a lot of technologies. I would like to go into that discussion, but I think it's all important to say we can, on the one side, talk about what's happened during COVID-19, but we can also talk about why do we have this infrastructure and what does it take? And the reality is, it's important to say that despite a lot of, what can we say, bad regulation, the operators have been able to deliver these services. And I think it's important to say that we have to focus on what's driving these things. And what the fundament for all these things is huge private investments. Globally, every year, the telecommunication industry invests more than $1 trillion in the infrastructure. $1 trillion is a giant amount which is invested. It's between 12 and 15% of all the sale an operator have is reinvested every year in the infrastructure. And the technology have a life cycle. We can see that the vendors who provide with the technology is developing the technology faster than the operators buy it, and the operators buy it and implement it faster than the consumers adopt it. But we also see some regulation taking place, which sometimes have a negative impact on competition, which have a negative impact on investments. And I would very much like to compare a little bit what's happening in the US over a historical perspective, very long perspective, and compare that to Europe, and say some of the things we've done in Europe, because we do a lot of regulation in Europe, which on the paper looks nice. It looks good. And a lot of the things that politicians want to say and do, it's like, yes, we do these things because that's good for the consumers. And to be honest, the European Union don't get the credit they deserve. Very often we see countries take the honor for the good results in the European Union, and very often we see the European Union getting blamed for the bad things which happen in Europe. We saw it when the vaccine came out. December 27 should be the day where everyone's starting doing the vaccine, and EU was so much ahead, and it showed up that there had made some hiccups in the process of handling the vaccine process compared to other countries, US, Israel, Emirates, and UK. But what's interesting is to say we have seen a numbers of regulations in the European Union which should look nice, but in reality is a lot of it have had a negative impact. Roaming regulation. There was a lot of operators offering cheap or free roaming to their clients, but then EU said, "Oh, we regulate roaming."
But I
And
mean, it is kind of awesome that you can travel anywhere in the EU and still be connected. And it wouldn't make sense to not be there, because in the US you can travel to any state, and
really?
your phone is still going to be, you're not going to pay extra, right?
But you had an operator like Hutchison Tree, which offered free roaming before roaming became mandatory in the European Union. And today, Tree in numbers of countries is offering free roaming in a numbers of countries outside the European Union, like
Yeah.
US, like like Australia,
Yeah.
like
That's why
and
I
so on.
use 3. I've been using 3 for 20 years.
Yes. So basically, what I'm saying is, it's better than the market find a solution than politicians tell them how to do it. I'm not the type who believe that politicians are the best to design things and tell what's good and bad. We see it also with net neutrality regulation, which gives some limitations of how operators can do partnerships with content providers and stimulate the innovation in the service side. Net neutrality regulation sounds great, but it had benefit the big players, the big tech companies. Come back to that. We see the free Wi-Fi EU have done, which is basically like, why spend taxpayers' money on make free Wi-Fi in certain places? So people move money away from the infrastructure which telecom operators invested in, and then over to a free network. It's changed the whole dynamic of the industry. We see the GDPR, which is fine in many ways, but the reality is that GDPR have had a lot of negative effects. We never talk about the side effects. We talk about making regulation, making laws, which looks good, but we don't look at the reality of these things. And I think it's very interesting to understand that if we look at a historical perspective, if you go back to around year 2000, there was 6 phone manufacturers in the European Union, key phone manufacturers, big phone manufacturers. Today there's 0. Europe was first with 3G. We are among the last one with 5G. In year 2000, the investment in Europe represented 30% of the investment in the telecommunication industry. Today is 15%. And if we look at it, it is actually so that if you look over the last 16 years, the average American operator have invested twice as much per capita or household in telecommunication infrastructure than the Europeans. So all the regulation in Europe have had a negative impact on investments, where in Europe we don't accept consolidation. We believe we need to have 4 mobile operators in each country. When the US, you have basically 3 mobile operators covering the whole country, and they have a much higher investment level, rolling out 5G much faster. We see that US is the world leader in many things, and basically, if we look at it, we in the US, all the big tech companies, the Americans or Chinese, if you could say like that, but in Europe we basically only have Spotify. So the US have a limited regulation, more a free market approach, where we in Europe believe that regulation is good for business, but the reality is EU have actually proven that over-regulation is have a negative impact on the industry. We also see new technologies coming in, and we'll come back to your satellite in 2 seconds, but we started with DSL, we had coax, cable TV networks, we have fiber to the home. We see new technologies moving in. Satellites is becoming what you call LEO satellites, low orbit satellites, which we basically see these coming in and offering broadband, and the latency on these satellite broadband connections will probably be it's roughly the same latency as we see on broadband delivering over cable TV networks. So
I wonder, those satellites isn't like considered a huge threat for the telecom industry, because Elon Musk just comes with his rockets and then he provides the whole global coverage.
No, I think it's a supplement, and there's a cost by doing these things, and it's just creating market dynamics. I think there will be more competition in what we call 5G FWA, which using 5G technology on top of a fiber network. So instead of the fiber providers provide with a fiber cable to your house, then the fiber provider is actually extending his fiber with wireless, and then you get the connection that way around. So that's basically what I think that would be a lot of it. It's the whole roadmap of the telecom technologies is amazing. It's moving so fast, and it's so interesting to see how it have evolved, and it's so interesting to see that we talk about gigabit. We can now get gigabit in our house or 700 megabits, but if you look at the applications, if you want to have Netflix in 4K, I think you need 18 megabit or something like that, or 20 megabit. So there's no application who use this high-speed broadband and so on. It's not like speed is growing significantly faster than the demand for speed, if you could say like that. People say, oh, it's cool, I have a gigabit or 100 megabit or 200 megabit in my house, but in reality, we can't see the difference when we are streaming whatever we use. Have a 50 megabit DSL connection, or we have a gigabit fiber to the home connection.
So when I'm in Denmark, I used to, like 20 years ago, to be deeply have a deep hate a little bit for Danish Telecom, TDC, because they couldn't get enough bandwidth and stuff. But in the last 3-4 years, they I've been able to have 1,000 megabit down and 500 megabit up, just over a 50-year-old coax cable with DOCSIS 3.2. That's completely insane. And I think this is so much ahead of any other country. Like, who's doing that?
I totally agree. But we see that in many countries. Actually, broadband speed worldwide is exploding. And we see huge investments in fiber to the home. We see 5G getting rolled out now, and even 4G. If you go to the Baltic countries, like a country like Latvia, which have a lot of fiber to the home, broadband over 4G FWA is a huge product, selling big time. So we actually get, and you could say, why just use wireless inside our house with Wi-Fi? Why not use it into the house? So I think it's interesting to say that, yes, it's moving fast, but we have countries in Europe where people don't go online and don't use the internet. Italy, it's like Italy is living a totally different world. There's so many Italians which even don't ever go to internet or go on the internet. E-commerce in Italy is quite limited. Probably lots have happened during COVID-19, but where in other countries in Europe you have huge numbers of people who actually do e-commerce and buy things online. Of course, COVID-19 have had a positive impact on this transformation, and particularly in those countries which are moving slow. But there's no doubt about that what's going on right now is interesting. But there is countries in Europe which are evolving quite slow, and where there's a lot of citizens moving slow. And basically all those things, you can actually see that in EU's digital scorecard. If you search on the internet on the EU's digital scorecard, they have some fantastic reports describing these things in details.
Nearly 20 years ago, 18 years ago, I visited my friend in Latvia, in Riga, and he had 100 megabit at home, and I couldn't understand. But the thing is, as soon as I tried to connect outside Latvia, there wasn't enough bandwidth, getting out. It was kind of like a local kind of thing, because they didn't have a backbone connection with terabits or whatever they need to get everywhere with that kind of bandwidth. But I wonder what they've been doing in the last 20 years. I guess some countries are trying to get fiber to every home, but for example, when I'm in Copenhagen, there's still no fiber. It's only limited percentage of the city that gets it. And don't you think that governments are kind of required to come in there and kind of mandate fiber to every home? Otherwise, it's not going to happen. That's Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. He suggests everybody in the UK should get fiber. If they don't do that, how are they going to get it?
Listen, I love when politicians saying that. That's just like saying everyone should have free ice cream. It's a proposal which is very similar to say that now, as a politician, I want to remove COVID-19 tomorrow. And to be honest, there's no reason to spend taxpayers' money on subsidizing infrastructure. The industry is making enough money to build the infrastructure which can serve everyone with the bandwidth they need. In Denmark, 97% of all Danes have access to 100 megabit connection. And we can see in those countries where you subsidize broadband, we can actually see it have a negative effect. We can see what's happening is you do a mapping and you say these areas, you can get subsidies for broadband, but we have a certain amount every year. So we find some criteria where we allocate the subsidies. And we can see those areas which get the stamp of being it's a geographic area where you can get subsidies. We can see the operators stop investing in those areas. And we know with the new technologies like 5G, we will be able to deliver even in the most remote places very nice bandwidths already even today and in the future. So I think that there can be some few places, but the industry have the money to solve that. Maybe if I was a politician, instead of taking money from the poor people and give the money to rich telecom operators, which pay high dividends to their shareholders, I would prefer to go to the telecom operators and say, okay, how do we fix it? You have the money, you know how to deploy this technology, you know what service is best, and so on. How can we do these things? And then find a way we're working together and saying, okay, we give you some regulatory grace and other things, and then you fix that for us. I cannot see why we are gonna give subsidies to operators like Deutsche Telekom, or subsidies to Orange in France, or subsidies to BT in UK, or TDC in Denmark. I think it's absurd. There's no reason to give subsidies to these kind of companies. They don't need subsidies. They make tons of money, and they have the money what it takes. And it's interesting to see if we look at the investments and we can compare here. If you have the right political framework, you can actually have a high investment level. And what they have been able to do in the US is actually by having a different telecom policy. The reality is that the American operators have invested significantly more in infrastructure than the Europeans. And that's a reality. So over the 16 years, if you look at the investment per household per capita in the US and compared to Europe, the American operators have invested twice as much as the Europeans. Twice as much.
There is something about having when I'm in Denmark and I look at the price of my subscription, I go on this Oyster thing, and it costs like barely $10 per month.
Yes.
And I get like 100 gigabytes of LTE bandwidth, and I'm sure they're updating it right now to 5G. Yeah. That's something that nobody can even remotely dream about in the US. Like they're paying $100 for their
they pay in the US. You can get a very nice mobile subscription for like $29, including unlimited international calls and so on. There is, but when you compare the US prices, you have to remember the US. In Europe you buy SIM only, and you don't get subsidized to your phones. In America, when you look at the price, Americans basically get a new phone every second year. So what's included in the price in America is subsidies for the new iPhone.
But why are they so interested in subsidizing Apple? I don't really understand this kind of thing, because pretty much all this money is going to Apple.
I totally agree. It's absurd.
They should be promoting cheap phones like Huawei phones. Agree. Like, but if you look at the money, that's why I use Huawei.
I totally agree. If we look at what's going on in this industry, I think it's very important to say that we have a lot of operators which have been subsidizing the phones in the beginning of the industry was great, because we got the penetration up, the adoption up. You could buy a phone for 10 euro cent or €1, whatever, and basically you got online and you pay a high price per minute, and then the prices declined. But if you look at what you pay for your mobile subscription and what you get for the money, listen, this is the best deal in town. If you look at your wallet, what do people pay money for? So they pay, let's say they pay 20 euros a month or 25 euros a month for the mobile subscription. In Denmark, the price is a little bit lower, but what do they pay? Then they pay 10 euros for Spotify. Then they pay 11 or 12 or 13 euros for Netflix. And then they pay about 15 euros for Office 365 and so on. So if we look at all the joy and happiness we get for the money we pay for our mobile subscription, what we pay is actually quite low. We get a lot of value for money. So I think it's basically what we're doing is we have nothing against paying money for Disney Plus or Netflix, HBO, Spotify, Office 365, or other services, but it's a big problem to pay a little bit extra for a mobile subscription. And then people is lying in queue in front of stores to buy an iPhone, which costs like 1,500 euros. It's 1,300 euros or 1,200 euros, depending on what model we're talking about. It's. I think sometimes people don't realize, and you could say people don't realize it. That means that the operators have not been good enough telling what's the benefit of the telecommunication? What is the benefit? Why does it have a high value for you? So operators have just been focusing on racing to the bottom who can offer the cheapest prices instead of telling customers what they actually get for the money and what the benefits is. And in the European Union, where they have been focused on this regulation, and there's also the European Union with Margrethe Vestager, which is a fantastic lady, smart in many ways. You can say there's a lot of focus on regulation of the big tech companies. But look at it, Margrethe Vestager, she became head of competition in 2014, in November 2014. And basically she said she's gonna fight big tech, and she said we're doing all those things. But all the regulation we have seen in the European Union related to telecommunication have had that impact, that in that period, big tech, Facebook, Amazon, Google, whatever, their market share, their turnover, and their profitability in the European Union have increased. And the best way to explain it is to say that if you said you had your pension savings and you put them into the telecom index when Margrethe Vestager came in power in November 14, and you said how was it gone from my investment from 2014 to September 2020, you would have a negative return of your investment by 6.8%. Let's say that if you put 100 euros into telecom shares in 2014, you will actually have 93.2 euros left of your money. You have lost money. If you put them into what's called the World Media and Entertainment Index, which including also Netflix and some of these players, your 100 euros would have been increased with 72.53%. And if you put your money into the FANG shares, the Facebook, the Apples, the Netflix, the Google shares, you would have a return of your investment of 474%.
But
so if you look
maybe,
at it,
are you sure it's the right way to blame the politicians for this issue? Because on the other hand, I would say that it's kind of a huge mistake the telecom has been doing, giving all the platform to Apple in this way, and Apple is just selling iPhones. And why have they gone on this bandwagon with Apple and pretty much giving them trillions of dollars to Apple instead of keeping it for themselves?
I agree, but the operators is, even despite the fact I've been living with operators for 25 years, they're not always the smartest guys, to be honest. Okay, fair enough. And they've done a lot of mistakes. They didn't understand to define the replacement of SMS, or they tried to do it. So WhatsApp and Apple messaging took that part. They was not when Tree launched. They launched themselves as a music and video company. They believe that in the future they should make money on video calls and they should make money on music to people. Spotify took the music business. FaceTime, Apple, WhatsApp, Zoom, Microsoft with Meets and so on have been taking the video call business from them. Yeah. So the operators have not been so smart, if you could say it like that. But a lot of the regulation which have been put on top of the telecommunication industry in Europe, and the fact that the European Union have not accepted them to consolidate, to get the scale, then that have had a negative impact on what they can do, because they've basically been struggling. In Denmark, Margrethe Vestager says we need 4 operators in a country of 5.7 million people. In America, prices is still declining. Competition is very tough, and you have also very appealing prices in the US. If you look across it and you just want a SIM-only product, you can get prices which is on par what you see in Europe, and even cheaper than in some European countries like the Czech Republic or Germany, for that sake. And I think it's important to say that the reality is that in America, mobile operators can serve 340 million mobile subscribers, and there's still competition. And in Europe, we have, across the European countries, we have more than 120 operators. You don't get any scale by creating synergies across countries. You need to have that in-market consolidation. And I must say that we have in the European Union saying all the big tech companies, that's a problem and blah, blah, blah. But honestly, all the regulation I've done in the European Union, which have been going for these people, basically have basically had the opposite impact. And the fun part is we have GDPR in Europe, but if we look at the fines which have been given on GDPR compared to what they can do in the US, where they don't have GDPR, but they have other privacy laws, Facebook got a $5 billion fine in the US. That will never happen in Europe the same way. So you could say that Vestager, she also had some issues regarding the consolidation of the industry, and she lost some cases, court cases, and so on. And to be honest, I think that she's a gifted woman. She's very smart, and I think that there's nothing wrong in her analysis. But I think the problem is that the medicines she's writing prescriptions on is not having the effect that she and her people expected to have. You actually have a side effect which is bigger than the effect.
I'm a huge fan, and I'm hoping things are going to go in the right direction. And she's also head of digital for EU. Yes. She's not only competition, she's like doing the whole digital strategy.
Yes, and to be honest, listen, I'm also a big fan of her. I've been drinking wine with her, I've been drinking coffee with her, and I think she's a remarkable woman, very sympathetic. She says all the right things. But what I'm living off is looking at the numbers. And I can't say the numbers are different. I must say that since she got into power, Google, Facebook, and Amazon have basically increased their turnover, their market share, their market position in Europe. Full stop. On behalf of European companies. And so we just look at it. The total in Europe that have been on the GDPR fines have been about 177 million euros in fines. But in the US, where they have a different way of handling privacy, Facebook got a fine of $5 billion. People don't realize that we do something in Europe which sounds good, but GDPR have a negative effect. There's a reason why Google and Facebook loves GDPR. There's a reason why they recommend the Americans to copy the GDPR model. It's because they don't see it as a threat. They can see that the GDPR model is a threat for small startup companies where it's difficult to be compliant with all these things. And it limited innovation. And of course we're going to take care of consumer data. Of course we're going to protect the consumers, but we can do that in many other ways than putting in a model which is great for those which can afford to implement the model, and basically which small companies is just an extra burden on top of their business. And I think it's important to say, if we look at this digital ecosystem, and we look at all the big companies across the world, and then we will say, yes, I'm Danish, I'm European, I'm proud. But honestly, if I look at the market cap and look at these companies and say, where are the European companies? If we look at the size of these companies, their market cap, which I have in this slide, you see big companies like the value of Apple is bigger than the value of the whole tech industry in Europe. The value of Amazon is bigger than the whole European industry. Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, and so on. The biggest tech company in Europe is SAP. So just look at this slide. It just proves it. Where the European companies? Why Apple not? We used to have 6 mobile phone manufacturers in Europe. Now we have 0.
Yeah, this is why I'm trying to show this slide, because in 2003 I bought this for 299 kroner, so that's like $50. and then there was like a $199 per month with a 3 in Denmark.
Yep.
And this was 5 years or so before the iPhone.
Yep.
So it had a big touch screen. It could
Yes.
do video. It could do. It had a little camera that could flip.
Symbian-based phone, I remember it.
And it was Symbian.
Yep.
So it was European, like the Nokia operating system kind of thing. Nokia was huge.
Yeah.
There's this other thing that my website is called ARM Devices, and I think the most important company in tech is like ARM, but it's been sold off to Japanese, and now they want to sell it to US. The Nvidia is going to take it over.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know. Somebody's been sleeping at some point, because we had everything and we just gave it to them.
I totally agree. Another thing is the US are not using Chinese equipment for the networks. In Europe, we've been doing it. We have the two biggest manufacturers, two of the big manufacturers, Ericsson and Nokia in Europe. And in Europe, we have basically say, open the market for the Chinese. The reality is that Huawei have better conditions in Europe than Ericsson and Nokia have in China. And basically, what have the politicians done? I think it's, again, we just have to look at the numbers. I'm always saying evidence-based regulation, look at the facts. And when I look at these things, I just say, I grew up with this industry. I remember Mobile World. I was sitting on the advisory board of Mobile World Congress for a couple of years. I remember when Mobile World Congress started in Cannes. I remember when it was so small that basically everyone was basically like the rock stars. They met at the one of the hotels and was getting drinks in the evening and sitting in the bar.
When was that? What year?
Oh, that must be like 24 years ago, something like that. So then we are talking about 97, 98, something like that. It's amazing.
But you mentioned, and I see you write a lot about Huawei, and that it's about security and it's not about anti-competition. Because the way I see, when you have this slide, the one that you have right there, and it shows the big buckets of American giants that are bigger than all of Europe.
Yeah,
I think the thing is, as I understand, Huawei has the best technology, the cheapest price per the value, and I think isn't it the anti-competition? Isn't it like the US saying we have to stop these guys?
I want to split it up in two parts. Huawei have a lot of stories they tell. They have created a myth. One of the myths is that the reason why they have been facing this ban we see across the world is because a crazy American president had a trade war with China. The reality is that's not the case. Okay, the case is that this goes back to 2005, and Trump's policy when it comes to Huawei is very identical with the policy Obama implemented way back. So that's a reality. Why do we have these things? Is because the reality is that let me say it in different ways. In the past, telecommunication networks was just something you and I used to communicate with each other. COVID-19 have proven that telecommunication networks is actually the fundament for the modern society. That's the reason why we basically the society is working today, to be honest. I always say to people that what is the most vital infrastructure in society? Is that the fighter plane which the Air Force have, or is that the telecommunication infrastructure? And then people say that's the telecommunication infrastructure. And then I said, okay, would NATO buy Chinese fighter planes? No. Would they buy Russian submarines? No. So why should we buy Chinese telecommunication infrastructure? This is not about proving of this. Huawei is a Chinese company. They're part of the Chinese system, the close relationship to the Chinese government and all those things. And to be honest, it's not about proof. It's about basically we don't buy Chinese fighter planes. We don't buy Russian submarines.
That's the NATO. That's the whole NATO.
We are living and we're defending some values. We don't share the Chinese values. Yeah, we don't look at democracy the same way as China is doing. And China is basically, when I'm looking at these things, I said it's very important to say, that's one thing. when I hear this story about Huawei's ahead and they have most patents and all those things, no, they have a lot of patents, but what's important is the essential patents, and the essential patents, that's owned by Qualcomm, which is American, Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung. That's the key players when it comes to patents. And that one that Huawei have the best equipment, the two leading 5G markets in the world is US and Korea. And that's without using Chinese equipment. That we're using Western equipment, Korean equipment from Samsung, and equipment from Ericsson and Nokia.
Yeah, but that's because they want to make a big bubble, another one of these big bubbles be an American one. Isn't that a little bit what they're trying to do?
Because the American says we're not in the wireless industry. That's not true, because if you look at it, I don't buy that, and I don't consider Ericsson as a Swedish company and Nokia as a Finnish company. Nokia is a merger of Nokia, Siemens, Alcatel, which is French, Siemens was German, and Lucent, which was American. Nokia is huge in America. Ericsson's CEO, he's Swedish, but he's also American citizen. He lives in America.
So Ericsson
have manufacturing in the US.
And they have Cisco, they have Qualcomm, they
have Apple, they have Google. So
yeah.
Google, you also, if you look at the wireless ecosystem, you basically have to say that the reality is that there's a lot of players, and you have to look at the whole ecosystem, not only the RAN part. Yeah.
But when I look at my, I've been using Huawei exclusively for the last 5 years because I drop them on the floor, they don't break. And like Samsung and iPhones, they break every second. Like they're like covered in a shell of glass. What I'm trying to say is that 2019, around that time, Huawei was going to be number one in front of Samsung in the smartphone business. Like they were already selling more than Apple. Yeah. And they were overtaking Samsung to be number one. Yeah. And this thing that the US does and tells Huawei, you're not allowed to sell Google apps. You're not allowed to put the Google apps on the phones anymore. That totally destroyed their whole market instantly. And this is crazy kind of. I think it's anti-competitive because I think I get much more per dollar for these.
I totally agree. But it's very important to, and you could talk about phones, and that's one thing. But we have to distinguish between the phones and the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So first thing is, it's very important when the Americans do these things, they have an entity list. And the entity list basically saying you're not allowed to sell technology to companies which have relationships to the defense industry, producing to the defense industry, and blah, 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 all those things. Fine. That's the entity list, and that's very clear in the US. And you also have the Weinman Agreement, which is basically an organization which is 47 or 49 countries, is based in Geneva, including all the Europeans, the North Americans, and so on. And that basically says you're not allowed to sell high tech to countries like Iran and North Korea and so on.
So they're not allowed to have mobile phones in Iran?
No, they are, but you're not allowed to sell advanced computers to Iran, for instance. Okay, and that's because they're trying to build up a nuclear industry and can produce nuclear bombs and stuff like that. So it's very important to understand. There's a lot of things saying we don't want to do technology transfer to systems countries we consider as terrorist countries, which are sponsoring terrorists around the world, or systems which basically are fighting against our values, if you could say like that. That's basically like in the old days, we put a ban on South Africa and Chile because South Africa had the apartheid system and Chile had a dictator and so on.
Now it's Venezuela and
Cuba and so on.
Yeah.
So that's fair enough.
But that's a U.S. choice. That's a choice from the U.S. This is they
basically says, listen, they can develop their own technologies they want. They can
the U.S. is when you talk about military, the U.S. military is like 10, 20 times bigger than the Chinese military.
The Chinese have the biggest army in the world. They have the biggest army in the world. But you must remember, China is moving very fast and becoming much more aggressive. And it's interesting to see, if you look at what's happening in Hong Kong, people is changing. I think it's important to understand that the China we have today is not the same China we had 5 years ago. I think that's very important to understand. We have a China which don't accept the same things as in the past, and the way they react is much harder. And you just see what's happening in Hong Kong. And yes, it's correct. Huawei makes some nice phones, fine for me. But my opinion is basically this is about national security. We can do business with China. We can do a lot of business with China, but we have to distinguish between security policy and trade policy. It's two different things. And China have similar policy. Basically, we did a report, which you go to our website, you can get it for free, about all the companies which are banned in China. How China actually banned companies. You can't get, you have it, you basically, we have Facebook, Amazon, Google, Netflix, and then they have the counter version, like Baidu, Tencent, and so on, all these Chinese companies, which you basically have it, the Western version and the Chinese version, and the Western versions are basically not welcome in China. It's also important to understand when Western companies establish in China, you cannot just do a company. You have to get a local partner and you have to do a knowledge transfer. Could you imagine we in Europe said, if you want to establish a foreign company in Europe, you have to do it together with a local partner and you have to transfer knowledge to the local partner. Else you are not allowed to do business here.
But this is a little bit because they didn't want to give all their money to Apple and Facebook, and maybe that makes sense a little bit in one way. Because
this is because they want to go in. It's basically in their 2025 plan. They want to go in and start to dominate a number of industries, and they're already doing it.
But they're not exporting any of that stuff. Like all this stuff is only available in China, which is a little bit weird. But I'm sure the Europeans and Margrethe Vestager and all these guys and maybe Joe Biden should just go and put pressure and say to the Chinese, open up YouTube access,
But it won't happen. You must remember one thing. The Chinese system is built on censorship. And in China, you have a security law which basically says that companies have to share the information with the government. And I can actually send you an interesting link with an interview with a girl which have basically been looking at the surveillance society and make some she's from the George Marshall Foundation. It's amazing, done a research about surveillance industry in China. It's unbelievable. It makes George Orwell like a kids book writer, a guy who makes books for kids. It's really amazing. I think it's important to say, but I think we should focus on saying this is some geopolitical things here. Biden's policy will not change from Trump's. Trump's policy is very identical with Obama's policy, which basically is also a policy which is bipartisan in the US. It means the Republicans and Democrats agree with it. And the Europeans is actually moving in the same direction. So I think it's fair to say, yes, I think the key problem is that in China, they basically have to understand that we maybe will put higher demands if they want to get access to our markets in the future.
I think they should just open source all the software and the hardware. If they want to sell it to us, make it 100% open source. So there's no chance for having a backdoor in this thing because we can go in and look at it. Just run Linux on all these base stations and stuff. Open stuff.
Yeah, but we'll come back to Open RAN in a short while. But honestly, it's not the solution, and there's been made a lot of security reports about that, and particularly when we talk about telecommunication network. One thing is a device which you put on the network. You can always remove that. But the important thing is, the same way as we talk in the environmental about a food chain, the food chain, the last one in the food chain is basically the animal who gets all the pollution from all the previous animals in the food chain, if you could say like that. And the fundament for the modern society in the telecommunication infrastructure is very important that the telecommunication infrastructure is clean and we can rely on the suppliers we have there. And we are sure that we have clean networks.
I just think that maybe the EU is really shooting themselves in the foot. Because if they were to be able to get much cheaper 5G network infrastructure, let's say by working with Huawei, then by saying no to them, they're losing out again. And the Americans can again control us in some kind of way. Like they can say, "Hi, you can stay behind us," and that's why the 5G is not going to develop as fast in Europe.
But let's take the assumption that Huawei and Chinese equipment is a way to fast track 5G in Europe. Okay, Huawei is sitting on a very nice. We have made a report about that. You can where we've been looking at all the telecommunication infrastructure there is across 122 networks in Europe, where we describe which one is using Chinese, which is not. You can go and get it free on our website. And to be honest, what's interesting is that if the Chinese infrastructure was a good medicine to fast track Europe. Why are we not first with 5G? Why is US 2 years ahead of us without using Chinese equipment? Why is Korea 2 years of us without using Chinese equipment? That's the reality. And again, we have to look at facts. So I think the the debate is very important. That Huawei and the Chinese want to turn it into a trade policy decision. I say this has nothing to do with trade policy. This is about national security. Talk to politicians, they say exactly the same. We can do a lot of business with China. But it's important that the telecommunication infrastructure is a fundament for our society.
But then I don't want to get too much into controversial kind of issues, but
No.
when you look at the whole revelations from Edward Snowden, and which everybody kind of was guessing that was happening, that everything was pretty much tracked by the NSA and the CIA, everything in Europe, even at one point, Merkel's phone was being tapped. I mean, all these things, why would we trust that, why would we put all our lives on Google and Facebook and all that stuff and not have one problem with that? But then at the same time, we are afraid of open source Huawei hardware that might be cheaper and let us not pay the Americans so much for the infrastructure. That's what I'm thinking.
That's a very good question. It's very simple to answer. Basically, there's a big difference between US and China. US is a democracy. They share the values with us. And thanks to the American, Europe became free from Nazi Germany in 1945. Thanks to the American and the fact that Americans would be the key, those would be putting the key funding into the Europe, into the NATO. The Western Europe have been free from Second World War and still even today. And thanks to the American, the wall went down. And thanks to the American, what they have been doing, actually the European countries have saved a lot of money during the Cold War on their defense budget, which they have spent on increasing the living standards for Europeans instead of spending the money on defense, where the Americans have basically have paid half of the budget in NATO. That's the reason you have the discussion about these the numbers of European countries should spend more on their defense budget than they do today, and where they basically all the NATO countries have agreed about this. And it was not a Trump invention, that was going way back. So I think it's important to say that there's a huge difference. America is a democracy. China is not.
They do have issues still with the democracy when they have people storming the Capitol, and when one guy can have more votes but still lose the election.
In Spain, you had a guy walking into the parliament in Spain a couple of years ago, shooting with a gun in the air. You have had the same in England. You have had that in all over Europe. This is nothing new.
But I wish the U.S. would downscale a little bit their military. They call it the military-industrial complex, right? And less use force when they go around the world and changing regimes and stuff like that. Like the Chinese, they're going around the world just giving the people money, like investing. They go around Africa and putting billions of dollars in their schools and roads.
Yeah, but listen, if you look at the countries, which they have the closest relationship to China, they have that in common, that is countries which is non-democratic, more or less dictatorships, which don't respect human rights. I think it's very important to understand China have more than 1 million Muslims in working camps today. We talk about the human rights. If you look at what's going on in Hong Kong right now, I think when you talk to politicians as we do and see what's going on in Hong Kong, the changes in Hong Kong had changed a lot of politicians' opinions regarding China. And going back to with the European Union, saying, listen, I think in the European Union we have a lot of good values. In Europe, we have good values. Things is moving in a good way. We have a democratic process, but we have to focus on digitalization, moving to the next steps, and we have to look at innovation. And if we look at the innovation, I must say that these American tech companies are very innovative. They're capable to make cool products people like, yes, but what is a Huawei phone without an Android operating system? What is a Huawei phone without the Google App Store? It's not attractive. And Huawei cannot build their infrastructure without using American chipsets. They need American technology. And I think it's important to say, if we look at the innovation going on, and one thing was very interesting also in America, that is what we call the private mobile networks. So we talk about that companies is replacing the Wi-Fi networks in the factories with 5G networks. And in the US, you have what's called the CBRS Alliance. That's basically, you can call it very tiny small operators, or a whole ecosystem of companies who do innovative services where you basically get some spectrum or access to some spectrum, or do it together with a mobile operator. And then you build a network on a factory, or it could be in a subway, or it could be metro, or it could be in an airport or in a shopping mall or whatever. And once you look at the innovation that's happening in the US right now in the CBRS area, and if you go to the CBRS Alliance website and look at that one, it's amazing.
What is the CBR? What is does it have to do with the 5G spectrum, or what?
This is 5G. This is all 5G.
So it's kind of like a system for roaming, or what is this?
Yeah, so basically is that you, in the US, in Europe, you say the operators are sharing some of their spectrum, but in the US, you can, as a company, get access to 5G spectrum in a limited geographic area. So if you have like a big factory, car factory, for instance, could be in BMW, whatever, then you basically build the network. In that area, and then basically you build a whole 5G network, but you connect your machines and your devices on it, and you could actually also open up that network for mobile subscribers so they could roam on it, and this network could roam with other networks. It's quite interesting.
So it's enabling a lot of innovation in terms of new IoT devices and stuff like that?
New devices, new services, software companies, startup companies who do these kind of things. It's a very interesting thing. There's a lot of innovation taking place there. So I just want to move one step further and say, yes, security will become important when we connect all these things. And what's the reason why it's important. But we have to understand security in the networks is very important. Let's go ahead of the devices. And then we talk about this Open RAN, which is not open. They abuse the open source name, but the Open RAN Alliance is trying to say that we need to create competition on the infrastructure side. And the Open RAN Alliance is basically 287 companies, 82 American companies, 44 Chinese, and 38 European companies, plus a number of other companies, which basically is talking about making a kind of an open source radio networks. And to be honest, there's so many myths going around on that. I could talk about that for days. We should make another video about that. But I think it's quite interesting to see what's going on there. But networks is changes, and basically the whole idea is in some European countries, they believe that Open RAN is what's going to replace Huawei. And to be honest, it's not. It will not help. So I think it's important to understand what's driving this industry is what we call the 44 things: business models, business models, business models. That's driving the innovation in the industry. Companies have some possibilities. Free market approach is working. Yes, we're going to take care of the consumers. We're going to be sure there's good products. I think there's a lot of possibilities in this industry. And I think it's important to understand that if we try to find out how to stimulate innovation, small companies and all that, and also in Europe, try to go out and hail our those tech companies in Europe was doing a great job. It would be interesting, yeah. But I think it's important to understand that there is a lot of possibilities, but in Europe right now we are falling behind. And then I would say you can go to our website. You can sign up for a free newsletter. There's a lot of free research notes. There's a lot of free reports and stuff you can get in order. So, but I think it's important to say, and I hope that we can find a way to move Europe in the right direction, make it more interesting to do these things. Yeah.
Maybe you can talk just a little bit about, so this you've been doing for 24 years?
Yes.
These reports? So there's just reports on a whole bunch of stuff in the industry, right?
Yes.
Talking about the roaming investments.
Yes.
Here, let me try to go back. Oops.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
No,
And
I think
how like do people pay to get access to all your reports, like
there's a lot of
companies?
free content. We have like a freemium model. We have a lot of free research notes, which is there. There's hundreds of them. Our newsletters is for free. We have a lot of free reports. If you want to understand a lot of things, you go in and you can sign up and get it. Then we have some report which cost money, but we make money on operators. That's where we make our revenue. And our clients is all over North America, Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia. It's all over the world.
All right. But there's so many interesting topics going on, and it's to do with politics. It's to do with
we try to look at the whole part where you look at politics, technology, regulation, understanding everything here. Yeah.
All right. So it's very interesting how things are accelerating in this strange time, and 2021 is going to be exciting with hopefully some new tech innovation that people can take to improve a lot of things in society.
I hope so. I want to say thank you for a great interview. I hope I can entertain your viewers some more in the future.
All right.
And I think you have a fantastic blog or video blog, whatever you call it, your YouTube channel. It's amazing.
Oh.
And I look forward to come back to you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Let's connect, and I look forward to your next reports and what's all these huge tech guys, and hopefully Europe will find a way to come back a little bit in the tech world.
That's good.
With some competition to these US giants, especially
to Apple. Happy to see that. I love competition.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you.